Today we're going to dive deep into the source material for a pretty wild geopolitical drama, one that, thankfully, never actually happened. We're talking about the fictional Greenland Crisis of 2025 to 2026.
I mean, just think about that for a second. What if a member of NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance, decided it wanted to take over land belonging to another member? It sounds completely out there, but that's the exact question at the very heart of this scenario.
And just so we're all on the same page from the get-go, this is an explainer of a fictional event. Everything we're talking about today is based on a set of detailed source documents that lay out this hypothetical crisis. Our job isn't to guess what would happen, but to walk through the events and the thinking as they're described in these materials.
So the idea of the US trying to get Greenland isn't exactly new. It actually goes way back. But according to our sources, when the idea came up again in 2025, it was different. It wasn't just a proposal, it was the start of a major confrontation.
And right here, you see the problem. There was just no middle ground. The US position, as described, framed this as an urgent national security need, something that couldn't be negotiated. But for Denmark and Greenland, it was about sovereignty, period. You can't put a price on that. It's a classic clash. The American side was playing a win-lose game. For us to win, you have to lose. The Danes weren't even playing that game.
This quote from the Danish Prime Minister, well, it just says it all, doesn't it? For European leaders, this wasn't just a bad idea. It was so far beyond the normal rules of diplomacy that it was, in her words, absurd.
Okay, so what happens when your first offer gets completely shot down? Well, the approach changed. The source documents describe a shift from asking to pressuring, a campaign that started to seriously blur the line between diplomacy and just straight-up coercion.
And you could see how things escalated over the course of 2025. It starts with unofficial moves, like visits and MAGA hats. Then it gets more serious, an uninvited speech on a military base, which gets a US commander fired for pushing back. Then you have these reports of influencers handing out cash, and it all leads to this final step, appointing a special envoy whose one and only job is to make Greenland part of the US. The message was pretty clear.
And then, in early 2026, the quiet part got said out loud. The sources point to this moment as a huge turning point. We're moving from winks and nudges to explicit threats coming from inside the White House, even connecting the Greenland situation to other military operations. It was incredibly direct.
So, how did the rest of the world react to all this? Well, these threats didn't just happen in a bubble. They set off a massive international response, and at the same time, they revealed some really deep splits inside the United States itself.
Back home in the US, there was almost zero public support for this. I mean, look at these poll numbers from the time. A whopping 73% of Americans were against it. That's a huge disconnect between the administration's policy and what the people actually wanted. And across the Atlantic, the reaction was just a stunning display of solidarity. An operation called Arctic Endurance popped up, with the whole coalition of allies sending or offering military help to defend Denmark. And who are they defending them from? Not a typical enemy, but from their most powerful ally. It basically created a situation where NATO was facing off against itself.
And this wasn't just a simple partisan fight. Major figures inside the Republican Party were speaking out against it. Mitch McConnell is quoted as calling it catastrophic strategic self-harm. That tells you just how radical these actions were seen, even by members of the same party.
So all of this, the threats, the military movements, the economic pressure, it all builds and builds until it hits a boiling point in January of 2026. This is when the alliance was pushed right to the very edge. And the final straw was turning trade into a weapon. A 25% tariff was threatened on European goods. This was a clear ultimatum. Give us your territory or we start a trade war that will hurt everyone. But this document from the source material is maybe the most shocking piece of the whole puzzle. It's a letter that directly connects a personal issue, not getting the Nobel Peace Prize, with a huge international security demand. It's a really stunning look into the kind of motivation being described in this crisis. And then, just like that, it stopped. As fast as it all ramped up, it was over. At the big economic conference in Davos, the administration completely reversed itself. Military force was off the table, the tariffs were gone. So the million-dollar question is, why?
Right, this is where we dig into the analysis from the source material. What was the endgame here? Was there some kind of master plan, or was this something else entirely? Let's unpack the theories.
To really get our heads around the analysis, we need to quickly talk about two styles of negotiation. First, there's distributive bargaining. Think of it like a fixed pie. For me to get a bigger slice, you have to get a smaller one. It's a win-lose. Then there's integrative bargaining, which is all about making the pie bigger so there's more for everyone. That's a win-win approach. This difference is key.
Now, the analysis in our source material suggests that this entire crisis makes more sense if you see it through that distributive, win-lose lens. In a world of complex alliances built on shared interests, if you approach every single issue as a fight where there has to be a winner and a loser, you're almost guaranteed to create conflict. Another way to look at the tactics is what the source analysis calls the Roy Cohn playbook. You can see the rules here. Never say you're sorry, always hit back harder, use the system against your opponents, control the story, and demand total loyalty. It's not a big leap to see how these tactics line up with the actions we saw during the crisis.
So what was the real goal? The sources don't give one simple answer. Was it a calculated plan to blow up NATO? Was it the madman theory in action, acting unpredictably to get a better deal? Was it a move that helped Russia by sowing chaos in the West? Or was it just a personal obsession that spun out of control? The analysis leaves all these ideas on the table.
And when the dust settled, what was the result? Well, Greenland was still Greenland. Its status didn't change. But the alliance between the US and Europe took a massive hit. The trust that holds everything together was badly damaged. And you started to see Europe pushing harder to build up its own defenses, independent of the US. And really, that's the bottom line. The biggest loss in the Greenland crisis wasn't about land. It was about trust, a kind of damage that could take a generation to fix. So this whole crisis was fictional, right? But the questions it brings up are very, very real. It's like a stress test in a lab. It makes you stop and ask, how strong are the global alliances we all rely on? And what happens when the biggest challenges to those alliances come not from the outside, but from within?